Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another DeepRockGalactic class build. God, it feels like it's been forever since I've done one of these. Anyway, we're going to be talking about a build for the Driller class today that uses the Cryo Cannon in an incredibly fun way that has become one of my new default ways to use the Cryo Cannon. So without further ado, let's talk about the Glacial Warrior build for the Driller class in DeepRockGalactic. By the way, don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button so that way you never miss another upload. So first, talking about the overall setup of this particular build. This is one that kind of uses a bit more of crowd control and also has some single target capabilities and allows you to have a lot of control over the battlefield in terms of how the enemies are attacking you, how quickly they can get to you, and it also gives you a ton of burst damage to take out groups of enemies. The core theme is using the Cryo Cannon with its crystal nucleation overclock to either freeze the enemies directly or set up hazards that they need to cross, which make it very difficult for them to get to you, which alone will obviously make them pretty easy to take out. But with a combination of that plus our Colette wave cooker, using things like the temperature amplifier and the exothermic reactor, we're able to take advantage of the fact that the enemies are frozen and use that to deal heavy burst damage, as well as spread more damage and status effects to nearby enemies. In essence, this is a strong crowd control build that is going to allow you to handle really good holdout type missions such as industrial sabotage, salvage operations, escort duty, egg hunts, basically any type of mission in which you have to hold out for a long period of time or you are hit with constant swarms. This build is going to function very well in. So then talking about the actual gameplay of this particular build, thankfully because of the way that the Cryo Cannon works and because of the way that this particular build wants you to use it in conjunction with the rest of your kit, you don't really have to worry about precision or being careful with your shots, and you're really just spraying icy slushy all over the place. Again, we are using the crystal nucleation overclock for the Cryo Cannon, which allows us to coat the area with icy crystals that make it difficult for the enemies to pass, and this is where a lot of the crowd control for this particular build comes into play. Essentially, whenever a swarm or just a group of random enemies comes at you, you just want to spray this any position that you can in which the enemies have to cross in order to get to you, and it'll not only deal damage but also cool them down and eventually freeze them. Now this alone is very good and you could just continue to fire at them or use your drills to take them out, but essentially freezing them is just part one of the plan. The second part is using our Colette wave cooker to use the fact that they are frozen solid to our advantage even more. Using its two mods, the temperature amplifier and the exothermic reactor, we are able to utilize the fact that the enemies are frozen and deal heavy burst damage as well as spread the frozen or cold effect to nearby enemies if they are too close. This can give us the opportunity to perform chain reactions and essentially go from one enemy to the next and freezing them and then shattering them, which as you can imagine makes hordes of smaller enemies very trivial. And there's actually a decent strategy as well to taking out stronger enemies such as Praetorians and Oppressors. Basically just use the Cryo Cannon to freeze them solid, and then the moment they get frozen solid, hit them with an axe real quick and then switch to your wave cooker. And after only about a second or two of firing, they'll take a quick burst of damage, which should be enough to take them out pretty quickly. This build really does have ways that you can handle just about any situation, and as you can probably assume, flying enemies are made pretty much trivial with this build because again, the Cryo Cannon is great at taking them out, because once you freeze a flying enemy, they die instantly. So now going into the actual loadout of the build, first talking about our perk choices. For this, I'm running a pretty standard setup that I use for most of my builds. For passives, I'm actually running a bit of a different setup than normal. I'm still running Resupplier and I'm also running Sweet Tooth, and then I'm running Thorns to round it out. I'm actually not taking Born Ready on this particular build because it doesn't really do a whole lot since neither one of our weapons require reloading. And then for active perks, Iron Will is obviously phenomenal, and you can pair this up with either Dash, or for this particular build, I tried using Berserker a little bit, just to help kind of capitalize off of the fact that the enemies will be frozen, just in case I am out of ammo for my drills, but really any combination of active perks will work well. Now going into the weapons and equipment, first we have our throwable grenade, and for this, just like pretty much any other driller build, I'm running the impact axes. Not only do they do really good against frozen enemies, but they're just really good overall. They do heavy impact damage, are able to stun enemies if you hit them in their weak spot, and they're just incredibly satisfying to use. Now talking about the weapons, as I said, our primary weapon is of course the Cryo Cannon using its brand new crystal nucleation overclock. What this does, if you don't know, is it makes it so that way the Cryo Cannon has a little bit less ammo, but in exchange you have the ability to create icy crystals on the ground whenever the slushy hits the terrain. This essentially works very similar to the sticky flames that the flamethrower has, as well as the sludge puddles that the sludge pump has, and the crystals that this overclock creates are affected by damaging and cooling mods, so the more you increase your cooling and damage output for the weapon, the more it also increases the damage that these crystals deal. And this is our main form of crowd control, as I said earlier, because this is incredibly useful at slowing down enemies. Just by itself, it's able to grind approaching hordes to a halt, And if you just do a couple of swipes back and forth on whatever direction the enemies are coming from, they're going to have a much harder time getting to you. Again, on holdout points, such as in salvage operations or in escort duty missions, this can really shine because it just makes it so that way the enemies have a much harder time getting to you. And of course, it also freezes them, which primes them for the next part of the combo, which is the wave cooker, which we'll talk about a little later. Going over mod choices, in tier 1, I chose the stronger cooling unit just to give it a little bit extra freezing power. Remember, that also applies to the crystals that we create. In tier 2, I chose the larger reserve tanks just to give us a little bit more ammo. Tier 3, the choice is kind of up to you. Both of them are really good, but I decided to go with the increased flow volume just to give us a little bit more flow. That way we can get ice out there faster. In tier 4, again, I chose the larger reserve tanks just to give us even more ammo since our damage output is already pretty good. But if you find yourself good on ammo and want to increase the effectiveness just a little bit more, you could go with the super cooling mixture or even the heart mixture if you wanted to. And then lastly, in tier 5, I am of course using cold radiance because it is just insanely good, especially with a setup like this. This setup allows us to be a little bit more generous with our ammo and be a little bit more liberal with placing the ice. Because again, if we put enough of it down, it's not really going to matter how much freezing power it has because the enemies are going to get frozen either way because they just have to walk through so much of it. Now talking about our secondary weapon, the Colette Wave Cooker. Again, this is a tool that we are using to clean up very small enemies as well as act as the second part of the combo that we are priming enemies with the cryo cannon. For overclocks, I'm playing it very simple and just using a liquid cooling system just to make the heat management a lot easier. Since we're not really using the Wave Cooker for anything super extravagant in this particular build, just giving it a bit more overall effectiveness is all we really need. If you did want to use things like maybe Mega Power Supply or Diffusion Ray just to kind of add a little bit more utility and flair to it, that would also work out fine. But for this, I just wanted to make the weapon function as best as I possibly could without any drawbacks, so that's why I chose the liquid cooling system. Talking about the mod choices, in tier 1, I chose the Magnetron Tube for increased magazine size just to give us some more ammo. In tier 2, I chose the Heat Sink just to give us less heat generation, so that way we can be even more consistent with our damage output. In tier 3, this is very important, and this is where we choose the Temperature Amplifier. What this does is it basically adds an AoE effect to the Wave Cooker whenever it hits something that is either on fire or frozen. So in our case, whenever it hits a frozen enemy, it will have a bit of cold damage AoE added on top of it, which is incredibly useful because not only is essentially everything going to be frozen whenever we hit with this, but it's also going to help spread more cold damage to nearby enemies, allowing us to freeze things even easier and spread that frost to the entire horde. Next up in tier 4, again, the choice is kind of up to you because I don't really use the alternative fire for this particular build a whole lot. So I decided to go with the power supply overdrive just in case I need to get a little bit more damage out faster. I can increase my rate of fire a bit, but really either choice is fine. And then lastly, in tier 5, there is no other choice other than the exothermic reactor. What this does is it makes it so the Wave Cooker has a chance to apply temperature shock on an enemy that is either on fire or frozen. What this means is the enemy will take a big chunk of damage immediately and it will lose its on fire or frozen status and spread that heat or cold to nearby creatures. Essentially, you're trading the debuff for immediate heavy damage output and then spreading that debuff to potentially the rest of the enemies around it. This combos incredibly well with the temperature amplifier that we just talked about because it allows us to even further spread the cold status effect to nearby enemies so long as we hit something that is frozen or in the process of becoming frozen. So then you start to see the real power that this build has because you are able to just spread cold to all enemies nearby simply by them walking through the crystals, getting frozen, and then you using the Wave Cooker to take advantage of that frozen status effect to deal heavy burst damage and then spread the cold damage to nearby enemies. And you can see it really starts to stack up quickly and you're able to chew through hordes very fast. Then going through the upgrades for the rest of the driller's equipment, first talking about his power drills, I just chose the extra fuel capacity in tiers 1 and 4 and the magnetic refrigeration in tier 2. The satchel charges, I'm choosing extra ammo in tiers 1 and 3 and the bigger carve radius in tier 4. And then finally for our armor rig, I'm running the very standard setup that I use in all my builds, which is improved generator tier 1, healthy in tier 2, and breathing room in tier 3. So give me my final thoughts on this particular build. Again, it is a lot of fun to use and has become kind of my new default cryo build to use, at least right now. It does very good in defensive oriented missions and can honestly be useful in pretty much every other mission type as well, because so long as you have a good position to be in, and as the driller you can make good positions for yourself to be in, this can really do wonders at just slowing the enemy hordes to a complete halt. And again, because it's an elemental build, it can function very well with the rest of your team if they are running any kind of of elemental setup, such as the Scout using the conductive thermals. Essentially, this has solidified the crystal nucleation as probably one of my new favorite overclocks in Season 5. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting the like button and consider subscribing and becoming a member today, as it really helps me out a lot. Rocket Stone Miners, I'll see you in the next video.